Are you ever mistaken for someone smaller than your story? The flag rope clicked against its pole as Eli Mercer straightened the chairs beneath it, the air thick with polish and quiet pride. The mayor scoffed a sound sharp as a door latch, and laughter drifted through the hall, thin and nervous, like steam from a cracked pipe. Still, when the light caught the small pilot badge on his cap, the room fell silent. The metal flashed once, then dimmed again, as if the memory itself had taken a slow, steady breath. The morning in Dry Creek smelled of floor wax and coffee. Inside the Delta Force Tribute Hall, folding chairs waited in neat rows beneath flags that barely moved in the air conditioning. Eli Mercer paused at the door, the light slanting across his silver hair and the calloused hands that once tightened bolts on A-10s. He set his thermos on the podium and began arranging chairs, one eye on the flag that needed straightening. A young volunteer called from the stage. "Sir, maintenance was yesterday. We're just rehearsing today." Eli smiled a small smile. "Guess I'm just making sure the chairs don't fly off." Then came the voice of Mayor Dalton Hayes, sharp over the microphone. "Let him be. Not every janitor gets a seat in the front row." Laughter trickled through the hall like leaking steam, the kind that didn't know it hurt. Eli did not answer. He bent to pick up a folded program that had fallen under a chair. When he straightened, his back gave a quiet click, but he stood taller than anyone noticed. From beneath the brim of his cap, a small pilot badge caught the fluorescent light and flashed a brief flare of memory before he tucked it back under the cloth. The band tested a snippet of the anthem, brass notes ricocheting off the rafters. Eli moved to the flagstand and pulled its edge straight, palming the pole like a vow. Pinned by protocol, he thought. Even silence had its orders. Someone called, "Hey, old-timer, you ever serve?" He looked over his shoulder, voice low and steady. "Once. A while back." The mayor laughed again. "Then thank you for keeping the place clean." Eli let the words pass through him like wind through a hangar. He reached for his thermos, took a sip, and set it down without a sound. Somewhere near the front, the choir director whispered, "Is he a vet?" No one answered. A few people looked away. He adjusted the flag again, and the hall fell quiet. Outside, sunlight hit the windows, splitting into dusty beams that drifted like slow searchlights. Inside, Eli stood by the flag, the hymn warm in his ears. He watched the band pack their instruments and the mayor check his notes. Nobody noticed that Eli's cap had shifted and the edge of the badge gleamed again, a token of service hiding in plain sight. The badge was no weapon. It was a memory rifle, unloaded, but heavy with duty. He didn't reach for recognition. He reached for alignment, flag floor heart. Then he exhaled a sound barely heard over the hum of the lights. The smell of coffee and polish mixed like old hangar air. For a moment, the entire room was still people frozen between awkwardness and respect. A child in the back clapped once, unsure why. The sound echoed and faded. Eli nodded to himself as if signing off a checklist only he could read. The badge on his cap caught light once more and faded to gray as his eyes lifted toward the flag. Outside, a church bell rang 9 times. Inside, Eli Mercer lifted the fallen program, placed it on a chair, and walked toward the door, his shadow crossing rows of empty seats. No one thanked him. No one needed to. Rain pressed gently against the glass of Maggie's diner, drawing soft rivers down the window panes. Inside, the jukebox played a slow Sinatra tune, the kind that made the air feel older and kinder. Eli Mercer sat at the counter, sleeves rolled to his elbows, watching the coffee machine hiss and sputter like a tired engine. Maggie wiped the counter with a dish towel and sighed. "That thing's been moody since Thursday," she said. Eli stood, cracked his knuckles once, and gave her a small smile. "Jets don't argue about coffee grounds," he murmured. The line made her chuckle, and for a moment the diner felt lighter, the rain almost friendly. He crouched by the old machine listening to its hum, like a mechanic listening for an old friend's heartbeat. A few taps, a twist of a valve, a puff of steam, and the machine gave a low sigh, alive again. "You've still got a touch, Mercer," Maggie said. "Guess old habits don't rust," he answered. As he straightened, something slipped from his jacket pocket. A silver pilot badge clattered softly onto the counter. Ethan, the young cadet, stationed at the nearby base, reached out and picked it up carefully. "Sir," he asked, studying the tiny emblem, "this is Air Command, right?" "You were Titan Wing." Eli froze for half a breath, eyes fixed on the window where rain reflected the red glow of the diner sign. "That was a long time ago," he said quietly. "Mostly paperwork and wind." Ethan frowned. "My uncle used to talk about that squadron. Said they flew the canyons nobody else would touch." Eli smiled faintly, but his voice thinned like mist. "Your uncle sounds like a man who remembers too much." Maggie set down a plate of pie, her expression unreadable. "Funny thing about this town," she said, glancing between them. "Some men claim titles they never earned." The words hung in the air, sharp enough to cut steam. Ethan blinked, unsure if it was meant for Eli. Eli only nodded, polite as ever. "That's true," he said softly. "And some men stop correcting people after a while." The silence stretched long enough for the jukebox to change songs. Outside headlights streaked past, painting brief flashes of white across the chrome counter. Ethan sipped his coffee, uncertain whether to apologize. Maggie busied herself stacking plates, but her shoulders sagged under something heavier than dishes. Eli reached for the badge, brushing a thumb across its surface. The metal had dulled over the years, yet under the light it still caught a faint glimmer, like a stubborn ember refusing to die. He slipped it back into his pocket, careful this time. "Machine's good as new," he said, nodding toward the coffee maker. Maggie smiled faintly. "You sure you don't want a refill on the house, can't?" he replied. "Rain's slowing and I promised myself I'd quit before it did." The humor in his voice was soft, self-deprecating, the kind that made Ethan grin despite the awkwardness. As Eli pulled on his cap, the diner lights reflected in the window beside him, rain neon, and the ghost of a younger man in uniform overlapping for just a moment. He wiped the badge one last time with his handkerchief, leaving it clean enough to catch the red glow from the sign outside. Maggie pretended not to watch, but her eyes followed him until the bell above the door jingled shut. Outside, the storm had thinned to drizzle. Eli stood beneath the awning for a second, listening to the soft crackle of rain on asphalt. Behind him, Sinatra's voice floated faintly through the glass, "The best is yet to come." Eli's reflection shimmered beside the red light badge in hand, a quiet proof that ghosts don't always haunt. They sometimes just wait for someone to remember. The town square of Dry Creek glimmered with puddles, each one catching the flicker of storm lights strung up for the parade that would likely never happen. Clouds rolled low, heavy as lead pressing rain sideways against the banners. Eli Mercer stood alone in the open square, sleeves, soaked hands steady as he retied the rope of the main flagpole. Around him the vendors had vanished. The crowd had scattered, and the brass band's music had drowned under the weight of thunder. He pulled the rope taut and looped the knot the same way he had tied cables in the old hangars, quick, efficient, certain. Every movement felt practiced, not for ceremony, but for survival. Wind snapped the flag hard enough to sting his palms. The stars and stripes twisted around the pole like they wanted to fly and couldn't. Eli leaned in, adjusting the pulley that had jammed halfway. The air smelled of copper and wet earth. From across the square, a young voice called, "Sir." "You'll get struck out there." Ethan, the cadet from the diner, sprinted through the rain with his jacket over his head. Eli didn't turn. Someone's got to keep the flag from giving up, he said. Ethan grabbed the rope beside him, both men fighting the wind together, sleeves dark and heavy with water. The rope burned through their fingers until finally the flag broke free, snapping back into motion. Ethan looked at him, chest heaving. You didn't have to do that alone. Eli nodded toward the flag. You don't leave your post until it's done. Doesn't matter who's watching. The storm flashed a white glare across their faces, and thunder followed close behind. For a moment, Ethan saw the badge on Eli's jacket glint faint, but defiant, like the flag was saluting him back. They ducked under the pavilion awning, both dripping. Eli's breath came slow, controlled. The younger man rubbed his palms, half laughing. You tie knots like it's training day, habit, Eli said. Some knots never come loose. His voice was half a smile, half a memory. The flag outside whipped and snapped, a rhythmic crack like an old radio transmission. Ethan leaned forward, listening through the static of rain. A faint sound bled from the speakers, left on the parade stage, white noise. Then a ghost of a voice breaking through. T3. Copy that. The words blurred, but Eli's shoulders went still. You hear that? Ethan asked. Probably just interference, Eli said, though his eyes said otherwise. He looked toward the flag again. Its movement wasn't defiance now, it was recognition. The rain eased for a moment, but the wind didn't. Eli adjusted the knot one last time, securing it with care. Storm's just testing the ropes, he said quietly. Always does. Ethan followed his gaze, and the silence between them changed less about weather, more about understanding. In that pause, something invisible passed from one generation to another, respect maybe, or the quiet weight of a shared code. Ethan straightened. You'll be here for the parade tomorrow if the flag's still standing, Eli replied. Somebody should be. Lightning flickered again, closer this time. The rain came harder, scattering through the square in bright sheets. Ethan started toward the shelter, but stopped halfway, watching Eli check the line one last time. Water streamed from the brim of his cap. His hands stayed steady. The thunder rolled above them, and for a moment it sounded less like anger and more like applause. Ethan smiled and said, "See you tomorrow, sir." Eli nodded without looking back. As the younger man disappeared down Main Street, Eli glanced at the flag now flying straight, illuminated by a flash of lightning, and whispered to no one. Hold the line. The storm answered with another gust, bending trees, but not the pole. And the storm didn't end. It moved indoors into the places where old vows and new voices wait out the weather together. The hall glowed in tired fluorescent light, humming softly above rows of folding chairs. Veterans Day evening had drawn the town back indoors, away from the drizzle and the cold. Cameras stood ready on tripods, cables coiled like veins across the polished floor. The banner above the stage read, Delta Force Tribute Recording Local Heroes Series. Eli Mercer sat at the end of the second row, hands clasped, his pilot badge polished and tucked beneath his jacket. The mayor's voice filled the room through a thin microphone. We're here tonight to celebrate service and truth, he said, smiling toward the cameras. His tone was sweet, but too smooth, like someone reading a speech written by someone else. We've gathered our veterans for a short documentary segment. Their stories remind us that honor lives quietly among us. The crew nodded, adjusting lenses and focus. Eli shifted in his chair, the sound of the metal legs scraping lightly against the floor. He didn't like the way the lights turned people into statues. At the front of the hall, Ethan stood by the recording table, nervously holding a cassette deck and a small radio transmitter. Maggie sat in the back row, arms crossed, pretending she wasn't watching every movement. When it was Eli's turn, the mayor gestured toward him with an open palm. Mr. Mercer, you served in the Air Command. Correct. Would you state your call sign for the record? Eli hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly at the word record. Titan 3, he said, finally the syllables landing softly like gravel in the rain. The mayor tilted his head, rehearsed politeness faltering for a moment. Interesting, he said, flipping through a folder. Our state records show no Titan 3 pilot. Are you certain about that? A few chuckles from the audience, quiet, unsure, but enough to sting. Eli's shoulders straightened. I'm certain about the sky, he said. Records fade faster than clouds. The mayor smiled tightly. I'm sure that's poetic, Mr. Mercer, but this program values accuracy. If your call sign isn't verifiable, Ethan's voice broke through from the back. Sir, maybe you should hear this. He reached down and pressed play on the cassette deck. The speakers hissed, sputtered, then came alive with static. Through the grainy hum, a voice cut through crisp, clipped official Delta Bravo to Titan 3. Mission complete. Copy that. Mission complete. The room froze. The sound carried a weight that no paper file could match. Eli didn't move. The microphone buzzed once, then went dead. No one laughed. No one spoke. The camera light blinked red, recording everything. The stillness, the breath no one dared to take. The mayor's expression flickered between disbelief and discomfort. Where did you get that tape? He asked, his voice smaller than before. Ethan answered, found it in the old archive box marked Operation Atlas. Thought it belonged here. Eli looked at the young cadet for the first time that night. Their eyes met, and in that glance a current passed recognition, gratitude, the quiet kind that doesn't need words. Protocol pinned me long enough, Eli said softly. But truth slams harder than any order. His voice wasn't angry. It was steady, freed from the weight it had carried. Behind them, the curtain rustled as two volunteers pulled away the cover from a new plaque on the wall. Under the light, the names gleamed in gold leaf. Second line from the top, Mercer Eli Titan 3. The flag above it rippled slightly in the draft from the air vent. Its shadow crossed the badge on Eli's chest, and for a heartbeat, the two reflections, flag and metal, merged. The camera caught it, a silent collision of memory and proof. Maggie wiped her eyes with her napkin and whispered, "About time." The mayor adjusted his papers but said nothing. Ethan stood near the soundboard, shoulders squared, watching the man who had just taught him what humility looked like. Eli stepped closer to the mic. The recording light still blinked. He cleared his throat once and said quietly, "All sign Titan 3, still on frequency." Then the room, as if understanding something sacred had been spoken, fell into complete silence. The anthem played softly from somewhere outside, the sound of brass echoing through rain-slick streets. In that silence, everyone finally heard him. Morning light spilled through the wide windows of Maggie's diner, soft and gold, catching the haze of coffee steam that curled lazily above the counter. The storm had passed, leaving puddles that mirrored the flag outside. Inside, the radio crackled with static, then settled on a familiar, solemn voice. This Veterans Day, we remember those who served quietly, who never asked to be seen. The diner's half full for breakfast rush paused mid-sip. Someone turned the volume up. Eli Mercer sat at his usual stool, hands wrapped around a mug that had seen better years. The counter glowed under the morning sun, and on the wall beside the cash register, a framed badge gleamed, his old Air Command emblem now placed behind glass. Beneath it, Maggie had written on a napkin, "Titan 3 still on frequency." "Guess that's you up there now," she said, sliding a plate of eggs toward him. "Officially part of the decor." Eli smiled. "Beats the storage box." Barely, she teased. "At least now I have to dust you every week." The bell over the door jingled. Mayor Hayes stepped inside, hat in hand, face flushed with awkward pride. The chatter dimmed. He crossed to the counter, nodding once before speaking. "Mr. Mercer," he said carefully, "owe you a debt and probably a dozen apologies. Coffee's on me today." Eli raised his mug but didn't stand. "Appreciate that. But it's better shared." He gestured toward the counter. "Pour one for yourself." Maggie filled 2 cups, setting them side by side. The mayor hesitated, then took his seat. Around them, the diners watched with quiet smiles. Maggie reached beneath the counter, lifted her own cup high. "To Titan 3, she said. The line spread through the room like a wave. "To Titan 3, everyone echoed. Ethan, the band leader, the postman, the cook in the back still wearing his apron. Cups clinked, laughter rose. The radio voice returned softly through the static. "Some heroes don't march in parades. They just keep showing up." The words filled the space between breaths. Eli glanced at the framed badge again. For a second, its reflection aligned with the window's light so perfectly, it seemed to shine from within. Maggie leaned on the counter, eyes glinting. "You know autographs are $2 now," she said, and the room laughed. Even the mayor joined in, shaking his head. "Guess I better bring cash next time." The sound was warm, neighborly, the kind that smoothed out yesterday's sharp edges. Ethan appeared at the doorway, still in his cadet jacket. "Morning, sir," he said a bit louder than needed. "Heard the broadcast on base. They're naming the new simulator Titan 3 Hall." Eli blinked, then smiled. "That'll confuse the instructors." Ethan laughed. "That's the plan." Silence returned for a brief, gentle moment. The smell of bacon, the faint buzz of the neon sign, the window light bending through the steam, everything folded into stillness. Eli set his cup down slowly, feeling the warmth fade from the porcelain. Then the radio voice faded under the low whistle of wind slipping through the porch door. The flag outside stirred once its edge catching the light. Maggie refilled the pot, humming to the tune of an old Sinatra record that had started again. Eli looked out the window, eyes following the drifting sunlight. "Good coffee," he said. Maggie smiled. "Finally, works right, thanks to you." He nodded. "Guess every storm fixes something." The diner settled into its small, familiar rhythm again, forks clinking rainwater, dripping from boots, the low comfort of people who'd learned to say thank you without needing words. The framed badge caught one last glint of morning light, and for a moment it looked alive, as if saluting back to everyone who'd raised a cup. The late afternoon light at Memorial Park was the color of worn brass. Lanterns floated on the small lake, their flames trembling in the breeze, each one carrying a tag with a veteran's name. The crowd had gone. Only the murmur of the choir from the nearby church and the soft hush of water remained. Eli Mercer stood beside the memorial board, with Ethan, the young cadet, who had found his old tape. The two worked quietly, fitting a small photograph beneath the heading, "Crew of Titan 3 Still Stands." Eli's fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted the frame. The picture showed 3 men in flight suits, sun flashing across their visors, one of them with his arm around a friend's shoulder. The edges were worn soft from years in his pocket. Ethan tightened the last screw on the brass plate and stepped back. "Looks good," he said. "But why Titan 3?" Eli's eyes stayed on the photograph. "Because it meant 3 promises," he said. "Duty, decency, and coming home." His voice was calm, touched with the rhythm of old orders repeated so many times they turned into prayers. We kept 2. The last one took a little longer. The wind shifted, stirring the flags near the path. Light from the lanterns moved over the names carved in metal, turning them briefly gold. Ethan nodded, the reflection flickering across his face. "They'll remember now," he said. Eli smiled faintly. They already did. They just didn't know what to call it. He rested his palm against the plaque, as if grounding himself to the memory that had once weighed him down. The air smelled of pine and cooling rain. A church bell rang in the distance. Ethan pulled a small radio receiver from his pocket, the same model that had played the recording the night before. He turned it on. Static whispered for a moment, then a thin voice broke through Delta Bravo to Titan 3. Mission complete. The sound was old, grainy, yet clear enough to make both men still. Eli lifted his head, eyes tracing the slow drift of lanterns across the lake. Their light glowed like small metals scattered on the water. Still on frequency, he murmured the words, half to himself, half to the night. The flag at the park's center caught a last gust of wind, its reflection stretching across the lake until it touched the edge of the lantern glow. Ethan stood beside him, silent, watching as the current carried the lights farther out. The two men stayed until the first star appeared above the treetops. The world around them seemed to exhale, no speeches, no cameras, only the quiet pulse of gratitude in the air. If this story moved you, the narrator's voice might have said, "If anyone were listening, share it forward." The lanterns drifted farther out across Memorial Park, their gold light flickering against the brass plaque that now read, "Crew of Titan 3 still stands." Eli watched the ripples spread the evening air, carrying faint choir notes and the scent of pine. Still, the calm felt earned, a soft justice no courtroom could grant. Beside him, Ethan pressed a fresh flag pin into the wood, the gesture small but steady. Eli smiled, the reflection of flame shimmering across his hands. 3 promises, he said, voice low. Duty, decency, coming home. The lake answered with its hush, and the flag's shadow laid itself across the water like a hand at rest. Then the wind turned, carrying a single radio whisper, "Mission complete." On the board, the light held a moment longer, proof enough for anyone who cared to look. Call sign Titan 3 still on frequency.